Hello, my name is Jake Swaney, and welcome to my Action Research Project. Starting off with a little information about my class, I'm currently teaching at Oceanside High School. My first period class, which will be a majority example for this project, consists of 36 students total. One student has an IEP, two students have 504s. As for English learners, I have two at an intermediate level, one at a learning level, and one that has been reclassified. Majority of my students are at the age of 15, but there are a couple that are 16 or even 17 years of age. However, they are all at the English 10 level. For this project, we are learning how to write responses using CER, which stands for Claim, Evidence, and Reasoning. The content they are responding to is science fiction stories with social commentary, which leaves room for critical thinking and an in-depth questions for the CER responses. For phase 1 and 2, I learned from previous CER responses on short stories and excerpts that students would meet or even exceed certain parts of the writing assignments, such as their claim or their reasoning, but need help with another part, such as evidence. Best way to describe this would be looking out into an entire forest, they'd only be focused on one tree. So, different students are hyperfixated on different areas of the rubric. As we advance, I have to ensure my students understand their writing assignments and their rubrics before starting a summative assessment. I can check this through student surveys and self-assessments to highlight where students need help most. I've learned that students are often honest with their feedback and what they need help with. However, they don't like asking for help in front of everyone. Teachers can gather an exponential amount of information from student feedback, be it from informal assessments or even self assessments. Reflection can lead to students understanding their own work better and making the necessary changes to improve. An example of reflection being used to benefit education is an article titled The Self Taught Man, which shows people reflecting on their own education that they have received and how they can improve it by going to the library. So, with all that in mind, my initial research question was how I could best learn and support each student's individual needs for the writing assignments, aka the CER responses. When consulting my critical friend group, they brought up a really excellent point. I need to be able to manage and help the class as a whole on top of learning the individual needs. So, with that information, my research question grew and ended up becoming how can I learn or support each student's individual needs when they are writing while managing the overall class simultaneously? I decided to accomplish this with a self assessment, what I entitled Peaks and Pits. I introduced the self assessment where students can write down their strengths and an area they wish to strengthen. It's a combination of reflection and building confidence in in the content while providing insight for myself the teacher on what aspect of the writing assignment could be retaught or needs to be reviewed one-on-one with that specific student. Now, there's a variety of UDLs that this can apply to, but I found these three to be the best representation of what this action research project is accomplishing. First, we highlight patterns, critical features, big ideas, and relationships. By having a pattern for the reflection, students will continuously point out their strengths and reflect on where they want to strengthen their work for a series of different criteria, all related to the content specific learning goals. While the criteria are different, the pattern is in finding their strengths and where they want to improve. Then there's enhanced capacity for monitoring progress. With student reflection and self assessment, it's an additional way for myself to monitor their progress with an assignment and how confident they feel about the writing that they are accomplishing. And finally, there's support planning and strategy development. Once I have the student reflection and feedback, I can take a look at it and from it be able to identify what lessons could be retaught, what activities I could plan in the future, and develop a way to help students catch up with the learning. As for critical practices, there's the reader response criticism. Now, all the writing students accomplish with their CER responses, which is claim, evidence, and reasoning, utilize a school theory on the reader and their experience with the literary work. This applies not only to the short stories or excerpts they've read, but now they'll analyze their experience with their own work as an author. Nearly every question that the students have had to write a response to is based off the idea of writing about their own experience with the literary work, not so much what is within the literary work. So now we're expanding that. Students are now reflecting on their own writing, their own experience with their literary work, why they themselves are the author of that work. An additional critical practice is values-based assessment, evaluation, and grading. The peaks and pits method for self-assessment is essentially a modified single-point rubric. One I took inspiration from my dad. Every day when I get in the car, he would ask me my peaks and my pits for the day, the high points and the low points. So, with this assessment, peaks are the high points of where a student feels they have met the criteria, their strengths, strong aspects of their work. Why the pits? Not so much a low point as to avoid deficit language, but rather how can they improve their work? How can they strengthen their work? And it is based off all the different criteria as seen in the example. A blank document of the English 10 Science Fiction Unit Self-Assessment. These are a couple examples of how students utilize the self-assessment sheet. They would point out their strengths and they would point out how they could strengthen their work. So, for example, with criteria 1, using CER for writing claims and rewording questions into answers. This criteria is essentially the C portion of the CER. But this student on the left side says a strong aspect of their work is that their claim is on topic and they believe they can reword questions into answers well. So now that they've identified their strengths, it's time to reflect. Where do they think they can strengthen their work? Well, again, the student on the left wrote that they tend to overwrite the claim, or in other words, they're not being straightforward enough with their words. So now they know how they can improve, and I know a possible lesson or area to work with them on. As for the student on the right, this is an example from one of my EL students. With the same criteria, they notice that a strong aspect of their work is being able to conclude something. In other words, they get to the point when it comes to their claim. However, they struggle with putting the question at the end, meaning rephrasing the question into a statement. So now I know where I can work with them on that. Now, here are a few quotes from my students when I asked them about what they thought of the self-assessment. Now, a couple of these are from period 1, as this was a primary source of where I gathered my information, but I also wanted to include a student from my second period who went out of the way to provide feedback. So, let's start with that one. I didn't think about what I might need to improve on until we did the assignment, but once I finished, it gave me a good sense of how I could improve. Another piece of analysis is from period 1. It helped me a lot because it showed me what I needed to work on and what I could do to improve my grade and help me in class. Now that's a very interesting point that we will go into more detail on later. And then finally, I thought that the assignment was pretty good. It allows students to look back and see how well they performed during the unit or semester. Overall, students seem to enjoy the self-assessment, not just for the unit, but for their work in the class overall. When I reflect on this research progress, the benefits of having students required to do this reflection on their work with a single point rubric proved incredibly beneficial, not only for their progress in the unit, but the overall class. The feedback not only informed students on how to improve their grades, but also informed myself as the teacher on how I could change or accommodate my lessons to assist them in that. My students were happy with the self assessment and even utilized it in ways I did not initially anticipate. It was originally designed for a specific writing activity for a specific unit, but they began using the self assessment to reflect on their progress in the overall class. Reflecting on it, I would have to consider this action research progress a huge success in not only figuring out where individual students may need work, but managing the class simultaneously by giving them the opportunity to reflect and learn how they can strengthen their work. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.